Um, you're being recorded, everybody, so no swearing. I'm always impressed when I see someone take the time to prepare and be thoughtful, something I don't always have time to do, and I appreciate you doing that, Chris. Or I should say, sometimes I don't take the time or whatever, because we all have the time. So I just want to take a minute to go around and give each of you a chance to say hello and say your name, your affiliation, if you'd like. You've put that in chat. We are trying some new ways of engaging and leading, and Heather and the team at the county are really game for trying these ways of engaging. And Agnes, you're going to appreciate this. We have been starting each of our meetings with a mindfulness moment to arrive. So today, I just want each of you to share your name, and then if you're willing, put your attention on the reason that you are interested in this discussion for a moment. This is a mindfulness exercise. I want to give you a minute to really think about the reason you are interested in being in this discussion. And then you're just going to introduce yourself. And if you would like to say one word that came to mind, that's fine. Please don't say 5 or 10, 1 or 2. And if you just want to share your name, that's fine too. It's really for you to have a moment to focus your attention. As we get further into these practices, I won't explain so much. But what is happening is we're giving your brain to arrive from a different time to arrive from a different meeting, or the distraction of the alerts that keep going off, the things that are trying to pull your attention away from what you want it to be on, which is this discussion. And I can't wait to hear at least 1 or 2 of you tell me why you are interested, what your reason is. I see you, so we're going to start with you. And please, when you are not speaking, would you mute yourselves, because we're getting feedback already. Go ahead, Ted Van Holland.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, Ted Van Holland, Harmony Design. Water quality is what I do.
Thank you. Sean O'Malley.
Sean O'Malley, retired, sort of, and I like water.
Lovely. Emily Hanner.
Hi, I'm the owner of Clearwater Operations and Services, and we are contract water and wastewater operators.
Amy Ramage. Sorry, Amy.
No problem, Sarah. Amy Ramage, Teton County Engineering. And I'm here in the conference room with my colleagues. Brad, I'll hand it to you.
Brad Ellis, Wyoming DEQ, just over to participate in this process.
Welcome, Brad. I understand you had quite a road trip.
No, wasn't too bad.
Well, welcome.
Actually, it's pretty good. Wyoming in January is really pretty nice, actually.
Heather Overholser. I'm the Director of Public Works for Teton County. Community collaboration.
Thanks. Is there anyone else in your room there that I can't see? Yes.
Just me. I came downstairs. It was too awkward. So here I am.
Well, go ahead. What's your word? You got a word, Chris? No.
I would second the collaboration. I think I had more than one word.
All right. Thank you. Hi, Les. You're up next. And you are muted, my friend.
Les Gibson, Protect Our Water, Jackson Hole. I've also been involved with Teton Village Water and Sewer, Indian Paintbrush Water, and I've worked with a lot of engineering projects. And the first 2 words of this study, water quality.
Great. Thanks, Les. Michelle Christopher.
Michelle Christopher, Wyoming Association of Rural Water Systems. I'm the source water protection specialist. And we believe, all systems need good water quality, and that's part of sustainability.
Thanks for being here. Joni,
Hi, everyone. I'm a hydrologist with Grand Teton National Park. I work with Simeon Caskey, the branch chief of physical sciences. And the words that came to mind were public accessibility.
love this part. Lisa, and then Tanya, and then David, just to give you a chance to get off mute. Lisa.
Hi, everybody. Lisa McGee. I'm with the Wyoming Outdoor Council, and I put in the chat that I'm standing in today for Brandon Reynolds, who'll join you for the other sessions. And I'll just say what came to mind for me, which is we consider clean water a human right.
Thanks. Tanya.
Tanya Anderson, Ecosystem Stewardship Administrator for the Town of Jackson, Human Health.
Dave Schuler, Teton Science Schools, lots of thirsty people.
Love that. Such creative answers, all of you. Agnes, and then Bob Frodeman.
Okay, I'm Agnes Bourne. Sorry, I'm a designer. I live here in Jackson, and I'm eager to see us maintain fabulous water.
Great. Thanks, Agnes.
Good afternoon,
Dick?
Bob.
Oh, I'm
Bob-
sorry, Bob. Yes, go ahead.
Bob Frodeman, a Hoback resident, and I have spent a career teaching philosophy and climate science.
Great, welcome. Dick Shupchine. We'll come back to you, Dick. Matt, please, and then Grace.
Matt Ostick with Rendezvous Engineering, involved with operating several water systems in the valley and sewer as well.
Welcome, Matt. Now the other Matt.
I wasn't sure which one. Matt,
I wasn't either, so I missed that. My apologies.
No worries. Also with Protect Our Water JH, I'm on staff here as a water quality advocate.
Guy.
Hello, my name is Guy Evans. I'm General Manager at Jackson Hole Golf and Tennis Club and the Grovon Utility Company north of town.
Welcome. Kelly, and then Phil.
Hi, everyone. I'm a hydrologist at the Bridger Teton National Forest.
Great. Welcome, Kelly. Nice to see you. Phil, and then John.
Phil Powers. I'm a Kelly resident. Own Jackson Hole Mountain Guides in town, and yeah, water quality.
Okay, great. Let's see, Christy. And then Brian.
Hi there. I'm Teton County's new public engagement specialist. So my 2 words will be public engagement.
Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, Brian Smith, Tri-Hydro Corporation. I'm the senior hydrogeologist, project hydro on this effort. Been out here in Wyoming practicing for 22 years now.
Welcome. Glad you made it. My screen is switching around a bit, so I'm going to say we need Bob, a Blondie, then James, then Jacqueline. And if I've missed anyone, please go after Jacqueline.
Hello, Bob Blondie, Rendezvous Engineering. Also been involved in the water business here, Teton County since 1975. Thanks.
Welcome.
James Bruff, DEQ, been involved not as long as Bob Blondie, but for several years on water and wastewater projects.
Welcome, James. Brew, not Brow.
Bruff.
Bruv.
Bruff.
Okay. Well, it took me 4 times, but I'm with you now, James.
That sounds good.
Let's see, who was next? Did I say Jackie? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Canori with Jorgensen. I'm an environmental engineer and have lived in the valley my whole life.
Welcome. Who's left on my Hollywood Squares? Grace, did you go? I'm going to finish up with Travis and give those of you who may or may not, maybe stepped away from your microphone to speak up. But Travis, you go ahead and then we'll pause and then we'll dive into the meeting.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon. Travis Evans with Tri-Hydro, and I've been serving as the project manager on this effort. So nice to see you all. Thanks for the great turnout.
Okay, well, in a moment, we're going to project slides, I believe, and just use your voice, use the raised hand cue in Zoom, or raise your hand, and we'll try to keep our eye. But there are lots of you, which is really exciting and great. So that is a high-class problem, but I want to make sure that if you have questions or you need to interrupt for any reason whatsoever, that you're really comfortable and feel welcome to do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I don't think we need to do team introductions. Can you go back really quickly? Other than to say, those are your partners. The town and county, obviously, Protect Our Water, JH, and the Conservation District have been substantive partners since the get-go, and Tri-Hydro and my team are here to support real talent. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley from Flittner Strategies, who's going to walk us through a little bit about your role and what's to come in the next few meetings.
Hey everyone, my name is Ashley Babcock. I've been working with Sarah Flittner on this project for the past year, and we have 4 main purposes of this meeting. So we want to provide you all, especially if you're coming to this meeting for the first time, joining this process, we just want to give you a background on water quality in Teton County. Tri-Hydro has done a ton of work over the past year to collect different studies and synthesize them for you. And then we'll update you all on drinking water specific findings that Tri-Hydro has come up with so far, and the project team. We would like to collect your input on what your ideal outcomes for this process will be. And that's our vision session towards the end. And then at the very end, we'll talk about mitigation strategy, ranking criteria that'll be discussed at the next meeting. And with your input, we'll form our process for ranking our ideal mitigation strategies. So we've asked you all to come to these meetings because you are the on-the-ground experts, and you're going to help keep us on track and provide your perspective and input based on your experience. So thank you for all attending. We ask that you prioritize solutions that align with the rest of the group. We want to make sure that everybody listens with curiosity, and that minority opinions or opinions that disagree are valued. And we want to make sure everybody feels that their perspective is useful and listened to. And ultimately, within this group, we want to make sure we're collaborating. That word came up a couple times, and that we come to consensus. Ultimately, the county commissioners are going to make the decisions in this process. So I just want to be we want to be really clear about that. This isn't necessarily decision making, but information. And the more streamlined and aligned that we can be as a group, the easier that goes for them. And we're prioritizing the recommendations and next steps with your views in mind. So the responsibilities, what we're asking from you all is just that you provide feedback on our ranking priorities and the water quality master plan. So when you see that acronym, that's what that stands for. So we're asking for essentially 3 meetings. This is our first virtual meeting. We will discuss at the end, we'll talk about dates for the next meeting and whether or not we want to have that in person. There's been some requests for in-person meetings, although we went virtual this time around to increase attendance, and looks like that was successful anyway. And in April, we will ask you to respond to an email that helps us with our mitigation strategy selection. So ultimately 3 meetings and 1 email response is what we're asking from you all. So thank you for being here, and Travis, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. Just to start out, I just wanted to give everyone just a high-level overview of the water resources in Teton County. There's going to be things that Brian talks about later that I won't touch on as much, but just wanted to provide an overview of the surface water resources, groundwater resources, and also touch on the Eastern Snake River Plain sole source aquifer and source area, and really define what that means from a regulatory standpoint. As many of you know, the Teton County is home to the Snake River headwaters, which includes many wild and scenic rivers, which is shown in this graphic on the right. And also from a water quality standpoint, most of the waters in Teton County are classified as either class 1 or class 2AB, which are the higher water quality standards set by the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. There are some impaired streams, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. DEQ classified Flat Creek and Fish Creek as impaired as part of their 2020 303B and 305D, or 303D and 305B report. And Flat Creek, as a result of that, Flat Creek had 3 segments, was broken into 3 segments, one of which is the red segment, the lower segment, which is impaired for recreational contact use. That was a result of 8 different sampling events and 1 single geometric mean of E. coli that exceeded 126 microorganisms per 100 milliliters. And then if you go upstream, the green line segment, that section is impaired for aquatic life other than fish, and that's due to substrate alterations. And that segment was originally listed as impaired back in 2002. And then when you get above the town of Jackson and into the Elk Refuge, you have no impairments currently. And then Fish Creek is part of that same sampling period. And I should note that both Fish and Flat Creek were sampled from May 9th of 2017 to August 10th of 2017. On Fish Creek, the samples, the E. coli concentrations range from 1 to 648.8. And the 4 geometric means were calculated in each of these sites, and it might be hard to see, but these black triangles here. And out of those, 3 of the 4 exceeded the 126 organisms per 100 milliliters. So therefore, DEQ listed Fish Creek as impaired, as recreational use was not supported. Why is it important to think about this? One thing that I think has been well documented throughout the county is groundwater is very shallow. And it really, the shallower the groundwater table, the more susceptible it is to potential impacts. But also the aquifer and Snake River, Fish Creek, Flat Creek, a lot of the surface water bodies are very much in communication. And just overall, the Jackson Hole Valley does have a very shallow water table. And Brian's going to touch on that a little more here later. The sole source aquifer and source area. So there's a lot of discussion about the sole source aquifer, and I just wanted to define what that is. So on this figure, you'll see that the Eastern Snake River Plain aquifer has been designated as a sole source aquifer, and that's in the green shading. And then the other area you see with the dotted pattern that extends into Teton County is the source area. So what this means is the EPA designated the aquifer as a sole source aquifer, but also that designation applies to the source area, which extends into Wyoming. So it's the streams and rivers and potentially the groundwater that helps recharge the Snake River Plain aquifer. But what this means from a regulatory standpoint, it's kind of anticlimactic. All it does is gives the EPA the authority to review projects that receive federal funding to ensure that those projects will not impact water quality. That's the only authority provided to the EPA as a result of a sole source aquifer designation. I just was going to touch on this. We reviewed over 40 different reports, and there's going to be a summary report coming out shortly to all of you. And I just want to provide some general themes that we collected during our review of all those reports. I think it goes without saying the alluvial aquifer is very complex, and it's not fully understood yet. Many of the reports suggested that in their recommendations that issues wanted to be further understood, it would require a significant study to fully characterize the alluvial aquifer. And I think that's, yeah. As I noted before, surface and groundwater in many places are interconnected. And we also reviewed a lot of data from the Conservation District, the National Water Quality Monitoring Council, which is a database of different federal agencies and their water quality data. And what we found is there's a lot of data, but it's very spatially and temporally variable. So it's collected in some instances in different periods of time or in different locations. There obviously is a large amount of data on Fish Creek and Flat Creek, mainly starting in the 2000s, thanks to the Conservation District's efforts. And I know there's been a lot of discussion recently about nutrient and microbial sources. And there's still no clear answer from what we've concluded as to the source of microbial and nutrient impacts. So that was just kind of an overview, and I guess we thought we'd open it up to any questions or comments here for a little bit before we move on. And I just asked to use your raise hand feature if you have any questions or comments before we move on. I'd also note if you just want to put questions into the chat, that is perfectly acceptable. And if we can't get to all questions today, we'll certainly make sure we follow up later with answers to those.
I saw nothing but a thumbs up from Bob.
Actually, I meant that to be a raised hand.
It wasn't a middle finger, Bob, so that's good.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. My evolving understanding of the situation in southern Teton County, especially Hoback area, concerning nitrates, is that first, the background nitrate rate, the residual background rate, is something like 2 ppm. And second, that when in, say, on the J-Bar W subdivision, where I live, if we have 10, that is probably the result of siting 16 septic tanks on 16 1/3 of an acre lots, rather than flow coming down from Hog Island or anything else upstream. That is to say that the underlying Bear River Formation, being shale, is serving as a kind of cup to hold this stuff. And so our nitrate problems are probably extremely localized in terms of our own septic systems. Does that sound, does that match your own understanding of things?
That's completely off subject.
It is?
I'd say that's our general understanding at this time too, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
Was there another comment? I didn't catch who that may have been. Is there somebody else waiting to speak? Okay. Anybody else with a question? Back to you, Travis.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to turn it over to Brian Smith now, and he's going to provide a much deeper dive into the drinking water resources throughout the county and some of our observations. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Travis. And Bob, we'll talk a little bit more towards the end of this too about those areas down there where you reside. But so let's talk about the overall drinking water resources of Teton County. Like Travis mentioned, we mined a large amount of data. And some of it came from DQ, as well as what he mentioned earlier. The EPA has a safe drinking water information system online. You can go in and pull up any of the water systems. You can see health violations. You can see monitoring violations, those type of things. But in essence, almost every resident of Teton County gathers their drinking water from groundwater. And out of all those folks, upwards of 90% plus get it out of what we call the alluvial aquifer. Alluvial aquifer essentially underlies almost the entirety of the Jackson Hole Valley, especially where it's flat and the terraces, along the main part. This is pretty much the sole source for Teton County, if you think about it. It's very large. What you're seeing here on the map in the light yellowish colors are the footprint of what we've interpreted to be the alluvial aquifer. That's going to include the actual river alluvium itself. It's going to include those reworked portions of the valley that are up on terraces. Much of those are comprised of older sets of alluvium that have been eroded and left up on those flatter parts of the upper terraces. They're comprised of all kinds of sediments, but for the most part, they are derived from the coarse sediments from the surrounding mountains. The Teton Mountains are hard rock mountains. When they erode away, they generally erode into very coarse particles, not a whole lot of, don't break down into a whole lot of finer clay material. As Travis mentioned earlier, with these gravel, it's a gravel bed aquifer, along the Snake River, the Gros Ventre, Fish Creek and Flat Creek. And in the subsurface, as I mentioned earlier, for the most part, they're coarse grain materials, but you do have some overbank floodplain deposits, particularly over in the upper West Bank area. But, when you get into the subsurface, if you pay attention to the Snake River and Gros Ventre River channels themselves, they're a braided channel. There's all kinds of boulders and cobbles and coarse sands and other fill-in materials. And if you can imagine that same type of subsurface infrastructure that comprises all these sediments that have filled in this Jackson Hole Valley, you essentially have the same thing going on. You can have these intertwining channels and intertwining preferential pathways. And so it isn't as simple as characterizing it as this big sandbox, although it is interconnected. That shallow groundwater table that we've been talking about and its interactions with all kinds of surface water bodies, not to mention, you know, any kind of stormwater runoff, you know, other kinds of surface, man-made surface water structures. It's all very, very connected. And that's the concern, because with that, it is highly sensitive to anything that, you know, might be stored on the surface, spilled on the surface. And so that's what we really need to be concerned about. Now, to touch on Bob's earlier question, in other parts of the valley, particularly down in that southern part where, you know, you don't have a broad valley. It's, you know, you can hit a golf ball from one side of the valley to the other. And down in that area, you don't have this large alluvial fill structure. You know, the areas like Hoback down there reside up on, you know, these topographic terraces. And now these terraces aren't comprised of these coarse materials. They're comprised of finer materials like Bob had mentioned, you know, shale units, landslide deposits. You know, there's some glacial deposits as well, all mixed in there. And from a hydrologic point of view, it is very different. You don't get a lot of water moving through those sediments. And we'll touch on that again here in a couple of slides. But the water is much less available, you know, there's the takeaway in those environments. And, you know, again, anything that is spilled at the surface or is disposed of in the shallow subsurface, it doesn't have any mechanism to go away. It doesn't have any mechanism to get diluted by a high flux of better quality water. So that's a big message I'd like for you to take away in this. Next slide, please. And so some of the familiar faces I recognize from our previous meeting, one of our previous meetings, where one of the early parts of this project was to characterize the groundwater vulnerability. We use the term sensitivity and vulnerability, and a lot of times in conversation, we use them interchangeably. But what we want to really keep focusing on is the sensitivity of the alluvial aquifer. Again, to beat this drum of shallow groundwater, coarse sediments, that in and of itself makes it very sensitive to anything that's going on on the surface and in the subsurface. And so one of the large parts of the sensitivity analysis was applying a widely used, accepted model to look at, you know, general groundwater susceptibility. And we call it the DRASTIC model, and it's an acronym. And we look very much so, the depth of groundwater has a lot to do with it. And, you know, all these criteria, it's an index score. You know, it's a simple integer numerical additive type of process where, you know, the depth to groundwater has, you know, from 0 to 2 feet or 5 to 10 feet, it has a particular score. And so we look at that depth groundwater, we look at the recharge, where it comes from. You know, here it comes from the majority of the snow melt, right, from the surrounding mountains. It's washed down the surface into all these streams, and it infiltrates immediately into the groundwater within the valley. We look at the aquifer media. coarse aquifer media, like we mentioned earlier, is highly susceptible. It can not only get in the aquifer, but once it's in the aquifer, it can travel large distances. We look at the soil media. Soils around here are derived from the same sediments that fill the aquifer. They have a coarse grain nature to them as well. Go out in your backyard, pour something on the ground. It'll probably disappear pretty fast. So that's what we're worried about. The topography, flatter topography where water can collect is more susceptible because it's there at the surface, right? Versus highly sloped mountain regions where something on the surface can wash off very quickly and be carried away. And then the impact of the vadose zone. Now, for some of you aren't familiar with the vadose zone is that area between the land surface that you're standing on and the shallowest groundwater. And up on some of the higher terraces, you might have quite a bit of vadose zone thickness, 20, 50 feet. But generally out there in the flatter parts of the valley, that vadose zone is very thin. And that's of concern that I'll touch again on here shortly. And then, the hydraulic conductivity, again, that's associated with the aquifer media. High conductive materials can transport bad things very fastly. And so we did that analysis. The purple colors on this map indicate areas of high susceptibility. The cooler colors, the greens, reflect those of lower sensitivity. You can see, if you're familiar with the valley, looking at it from Google Earth, you can see some of the areas there in the middle of the valley that have greens and yellows. Those are associated with the Gros Ventre Buttes. They've got a lot more topography. Their geology is completely different. And even though we have some known impacts down in the Hoback area, because that area is different geologically and hydrologically and topographically, it scores lower on the sensitivity, even though we're well aware of what's going on down there. And so I'll try to tie some of that together here at the end of my portion of this presentation. But next slide, please. So obviously, one of the things we're tasked with is understanding this drinking water quality. And so one of the ways we do this is to look at the different types of public systems that are out there. And a community system, which are the larger systems, City of Jackson, the larger water and sewer districts, those are community systems. They serve the same people year round. And then those are the purple designated polygons you see in this map. We also have green and we also have some orange ones. And those are the what's called transient non-community and non-transient community. So sometimes I have to remind myself which one is which, but the transient non-community is something like a gas station or a convenience store or, maybe a national park office building, something where, the people may not reside inside for a long period of time, but nevertheless, they're supplied, it's public water. They come and go, they drink it, they use it. Campgrounds are prime examples where campers come in and spend a day or a week or maybe a little longer, and they're supplied with potable water. Non-transient communities are the classic is a school. They're there for over 6 months out of the year, but they don't permanently reside there, but they drink that same source of water for a large amount of time. So these community systems are administered by the Region 8 EPA in Denver. Wyoming has this unique primacy where the EPA enforces things. The DEQ Water Quality Division is parallel in those, but the actual enforcement is done by the EPA. And hence I mentioned earlier the Safe Drinking Water Information System called SIDWIS. Again, all of these community systems are required to submit water quality samples, based upon their size and their system type. And so you can look up, again, any violations that have occurred in the last 10 years. You can look to see who's in compliance with, say, a new lead and copper rule, those type of things. And they also on follow, there are follow-ups if there are violations, when the proper paperwork is submitted to address those violations, you can also see that as well. Let's move on to the next slide. Michelle, as you're aware, we did source water. We did a statewide source water protection program back in 2004. What you're seeing here on the right are the actual delineations that were completed for the community water systems back in 2004. It was a voluntary program. So there, you're going to look on this map and go, oh, well, where's that one? Where's that one? It was simply a matter, to my knowledge, that they did not sign up for the program. I was very familiar with the program. I was the project manager on it. And so, within Teton County, all of the public water supplies, again, as mentioned earlier, are all groundwater. And so they were approached in two different ways. One was if they were large enough based on the user population and well capacities, we implemented a wellhead analytic model that is widely used. It's produced by the EPA, and it's used in many different wellhead protection documents nationwide. And it's an analytic element model. It's a pretty simple equation. It takes into account the well capacity. For instance, the western 3 wells that the town of Jackson uses out there, west of the high school area, we factored in all of those 3 wells running at maximum capacity, and we ended up doing 3 zones. The largest zone of protection is considered a 10-year protection zone. That's an estimate of if a groundwater particle, a bad groundwater particle, is introduced into the aquifer, it would take it approximately 10 years to reach that wellhead. And so what you're seeing here in these circles and polygons on the right is the estimated, what we call zone 3, or the 10-year zone of protection. And you'll notice some of them are not oddly shaped, but differently shaped, and some of them are simple radiuses. And so the difference between those were also based on user population, and whether it was a transient, non-transient type of water system. And so, as you can see, there are voids within this alluvial aquifer system and in other areas where we have public systems that, they weren't all assessed in this, because they simply didn't volunteer for the program. Otherwise, they would have been completed. And so as part of, source water protection and aquifer protection as a whole, if you show the next slide, please, we look at all these potential sources of contamination. And, so there are point sources and there are non-point sources. And mostly we not deal with, but mostly we've approached it from a point source threat point of view. And what you're seeing here, go back, there we go. what we're seeing here with these different colored dots are underground storage tanks and small users of what's considered hazardous waste. I call them hazardous waste generators. They don't necessarily make the hazardous materials, but they can store and use them. And that's what you see in the purple. The red and green are storage tanks. The green ones are still active in the, and they are administered by the DEQ. And the red ones are older historical tank sites. They have been closed out. Some of them, had releases to the environment, but they have been closed out of the system and are no longer monitored on a regular basis. Why are they important? I think we can see the picture here. They're important because if they're an underground storage tank, they are most likely going to be in very close proximity to the shallow groundwater. So, these are a very acute source, right? Even a small leak of gasoline or diesel or some sort of solvent is an immediate threat, not just to the public water systems. We haven't even, talked about the individual residents, right? There's over 2,000 permitted individual wells in Teton County. And that's a lot of wells, right? And they're all shallow. And for the most part, we have to consider that those wells are using water in some sort of mechanism to, humans or animals and the whatnot. So, they're all of a high threat, right? Potential direct release to the aquifer, close proximity to residents, large water systems like town of Jackson, Aspen Pines, Teton Village, those sorts of things. Can we go to the next slide? And so I want to talk a little bit about these non-point sources. Just focus on a few things. I think most of you are aware of the ongoing activities that have been going on associated with the airport with what's called PFAS. These are polyfluorinated compounds. They're very complex chemicals, and they have been widely used. At this location, they're associated with firefighting foam use. They have to train, they have to actually use the foam, make sure, all their firefighting equipment is in working order. And so, there's some significant releases to the ground going on out there. This is taken from the airport website itself that shows, their depiction of the length of what they call their PFAS plume out there. And PFAS, like I said, is a ubiquitous substance. All those, non-stick cooking pans from the 70s on, for the most part in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, those non-stick materials, contained some significant amount of similar compounds. That's what made it not, your eggs not stick to your pan. Way back in the day, some of us may remember going to the store and getting Scotch Guard to spray on our coveralls because we're going out in the snow or we're going out in the rain, long before Gore-Tex and the whatnot became available, and other waterproofing materials that are pretty ubiquitous. They all use these long chain hydrocarbons because they were good at repelling water. And guess what? When it gets in the water, it's hard to get out. It doesn't bond very well with things. And so, it gets in and to use the euphemism, hits the groundwater running. It goes with the flow, and it's very hard to remediate. And benzene is a compound and a lot of fuels. And it's obviously ubiquitous, hence why the underground storage program is so important. And, you know, we have seen some detections above what's called the MCL, the maximum contaminant level. We've had some hits in one of the wells associated with the town of Jackson. They've been few, they've been intermittent, but nonetheless, we do need to be aware of its presence. And also some of the, there are 3 supply wells that the town of Jackson uses that are located out there on the southeast corner of the National Elk Refuge. And recently there's been some identification of chronic wasting disease out there. And, you know, it's not well understood yet how that might be a potential threat within groundwater, but nonetheless, you know, we should be aware of that.
Brian, I see a couple of questions.
Okay.
Ted has his hand up, and Guy also had an earlier question. How fast does water move through the aquifer was his question. Which
Okay, yeah. So there's lots of measured conductivity data and well test data out there. And there's a little bit of differing opinions on it, but, you know, there are reported estimates up to 20 to 100 feet per day of groundwater velocity, you know, and that's going to depend, like I talked about earlier, on whether that water is traveling in, you know, a coarse buried channel or within, you know, a melange of other mixed sediments. But and if you were at the water rally earlier this year and you listen to the keynote speaker, he's an expert on these gravel bed aquifers in the Mountain West. And, you know, he estimates that, you know, closer to these highly moving, higher velocity streams, that this groundwater surface water interaction, you know, can be up to several hundred feet per day. So, you know, we're talking in these coarser sediments, a significant groundwater velocity.
Ted?
Yeah, thanks. You showed some slides earlier that characterize the different kinds of public water systems, and I just wanted to share a few observations that I've had, which are 2 things. One is that I think that Teton County sees a fair number of shared water systems in areas that probably, when they first started to develop, were not public water systems, but as they've grown and vacant lots have developed, they've probably crossed that threshold of 15 service connections on one shared system. And I don't know that there's been a good mechanism for identifying those, and maybe not even an understanding on the operators of the systems and you know, or the owners of the systems and whoever they have operating them, that it's time to, you know, register as a public water system. And kind of along that as well, there's I think an increased amount of people renting their own homes. And when you consider, you know, even a small number of service connections sharing a well, say, you know, like 10 homes on a well, it wouldn't be a community water system. But if you had a lot of rentals going on and they had a lot of bedrooms in each unit, you could probably hit 60 different consumers of that water per year. And again, that would classify them as strangely as a transient water system, or,
yep.
You know, but even though they're just residential houses. So it's kind of an odd thing, but just, you know, when we're talking about water quality, it's not just what's out there in the environment. I think some of it has to do with our own management, you know, collectively in the regulatory and in the operations field of what, you know, what should be protecting consumers of water.
I would agree. Yes, it is hard to track down when you go through you know, like you mentioned before, some of these, you know, legacy type arrangements where it's not real clear who's administering and who's actually supplying what, they do slip under the radar.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ted.
I don't see any other questions, and I know we're about right on time. So if there are no other questions, I would like to keep it that way. There's one though. Guy, go ahead.
Specifically about my question about how the velocity of groundwater. So if you could put up that other slide with the PFAS and the airport. So my question is if the groundwater, sorry about that, if the PFAS is getting into the water at the airport and the groundwater velocity is approximately 200 feet per day, why doesn't the water, I don't know, why doesn't the groundwater clear out with that? I mean, why doesn't the PFAS kind of clear out of the groundwater if it's being flushed that quickly through the aquifer? I mean, does that mean that the airport is continuously putting PFAS into the aquifer?
So what also can happen, you know, I talked about the compound not being degradable, but you've got a significant annual fluctuation in the aquifer too. And so, you know, depending upon when these releases, or, I mean, we have no, I'm not intimate with the project, so I'm not real clear on what they think the release history is, right? And so you factor in that you could have, if it's a continual release, hypothetically, you're going to have releases at low groundwater, releases at high groundwater. The releases at high groundwater, potentially when the water level drops, they're not going to be degraded within that sediment, but they'll stay there in that dried out portion of the aquifer. And so then a year later, water table comes back up to that zone again and then mobilizes it again. And so, you know, it's not a linear process either. And you see this long tail looking plume, which, you know, makes sense in your head that, hey, okay, groundwater's fast. It was released at this small area and it took off on a general gradient line. But again, you've got the groundwater particles that travel fast, but doesn't necessarily mean they're traveling in a straight line. You know, they've got a sinuous path themselves from grain to grain to grain to grain. And so, you know, that's also a factor in why, you know, if I say, you know, if you hear groundwater travels at 20 feet per day or 1,000 feet per day, and you add up the number of days and you times that by 1,000, you're like, well, that should be down to alpine by now, right? But there's a lot of other things going on in subsurface, Guy.
And I thought I might just add, I mean, PFAS, this is a new and emerging contaminant. It's not yet regulated. There are advisories that the EPA has issued, but there's no formal rulemaking as far as the groundwater protection standard. We're looking at very, very low levels here. We're talking in the parts per trillion, whereas before with like nitrate, we're talking about parts per million. And one of the things is the technology at the laboratories to detect it at these low levels is it's evolving every day.
Yeah.
And then, you know, PFAS it is highly mobile, just its nature. So
I mean, our understanding, and I've been working on PFAS projects for the last 4+ years, and you know, they all have some issues about them that we don't fully understand. You know, they don't all act the same in similar conditions, and that's part of it. Where the compounds are so widespread, there's probably going to be more that we identify specifically as people, pour more knowledge and experience into the testing realm. So, it is still kind of in its infancy. So there's a lot we need to understand.
Thank you, you guys. I'm going to keep watching for hands, and Chris and Travis and Ashley, keep me honest if I miss someone. We'd like to transition now, and it is a transition. You've obviously heard a lot about the data and the analysis and sort of the scientific infrastructure that is helping us get our hands around the set of challenges and the options that are available for us in terms of moving towards mitigation options and strategies. You will recall, those of you who were involved with our October meeting, that we wanted to have an opportunity to have a little more freedom on the agenda for you to talk about your vision, sort of aspirationally, and we call this appreciative inquiry. Like, what is it that you really hope to see in your own words, from your own vantage points and experiences? So for some reason, Travis, your slides aren't projecting like they seem to be for the others. So I'm just making sure you're on the visioning session slide for everybody to see the questions.
I am.
Thank you. So what we really just want to have an opportunity, and I think I'm going to suggest this. Let's use chat, given how many of us there are, and let's go methodically through these questions. And then we will kind of see where we are, and likely it will spur some of you who really want to weigh in with your words, and that's fine too. This is just an opportunity for us to, we have the science, and that is really important. And we also want to infuse this whole conversation with what is important to you from a value standpoint, from a community cohesion standpoint, from how you are impacted, you and your families or your businesses. We also want to be thinking about who isn't here that might be impacted, who is not in these discussions. This is an emerging priority for all of us doing business as we consider how many past mistakes we have made by including the same old. So I'm challenging you to help us ensure that we are thinking about people who are impacted and aren't able to be in meetings like this one. Are there any questions before I just take us through pretty straightforward questions? And Ashley, I'll ask you to watch. We're probably different, but you can watch the second screen so that I can watch the first one. So again, using chat, unless if you're just dying to say something, we're friends here, so feel free to use your voice. We'd really like to know what topics are you interested in weighing in on, if there are specific topics that were raised today that are important to you. We'd like to know a little bit about what they are and why. That's question number one. Since they are projected, I'm just going to keep slowly going through the questions. There's not a grade for this, so you don't have to answer all of them, but you're welcome to. I want you to really think about why you care about this a little deeper than, because I do water quality work for a living. When you think about the impact of water quality on communities, especially this one, and as we think about our wildlife and the threats that we heard about because of the special conditions of our particular watershed and water system. I see some of you writing. That's good. I want you to think about an ideal outcome, and I'd like you to go deeper than the position of, yep, we're for what good water quality, right? Think about how this process can be successful where maybe others haven't. what that would look like. Think about how we engage with people in the draft report, the final report, where sometimes, again, it's the same. Ted, you know this from your county career, and the county folks know it too. Tanya knows it. It can be very difficult to get people to be aware of important reports like this and weigh in. So think about ideal outcomes beyond measuring water quality in a specific way. Of course, include that if you'd like. Some of you might be aware of prescriptions or mitigations that are occurring elsewhere. I know I've heard a lot about this in the beginning of Friends of Fish Creek, what is now POW-JH. You want to definitely make room for that in case some of you know of emerging technology that might have an application here. And then finally, what do you want us to keep in mind? The project team, any of the consultants, and ultimately the county commissioners who will be the decision makers. What do you want us to keep in mind? Another way of asking this in the way that you'll notice the questions aren't encouraging you to think about all the concerns and worries. There's a reason for that. But I do have a shortcut for this last question, and sometimes it makes it easier to answer if you think about what has really frustrated you in the past or been an obstacle in a multi-stakeholder engagement like this for getting a positive outcome, an ideal outcome, a healthy outcome. I see, thanks to Michelle, enough time has passed that we're going to start to see some activity in chat, and that is great. So most of Teton County utilizes the same aquifer, albeit in different places. If something should happen to the aquifer, whether it be quality or quantity related, what options are available for alternate sources? I'm going to, I have no idea. So in a minute, I'm going to make space for county engineers or water experts to answer where we know answers, and where we don't, we're going to flag that and see if an answer can be uncovered. That is not something I thought about, Michelle. And being that I'm already an insomniac, I appreciate you adding one more thing that I can think about when I'm not sleeping. From Amy, how county regulations can be updated for our specific issues and concerns. Great. It's great. More intentional water conservation measures. Aha. Meaning use less, thanks, Lauren. And reuse of water to help offset demand for new potable water. Okay. That is very helpful, the specificity, Lauren. Is there anybody who wants to speak? Just raise your hand or wave your hand. I'm going to keep, there we go. Carlin, thanks. I would like to see unification of resources towards very specific goals. And by that, do you mean human resources, financial resources? And you're welcome. I don't see you, Carlin. You're welcome to come on mic, or all of the above. Okay. Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. From Lisa, seems like the problem is relatively well studied and understood. How do we proceed to set new regs so that we can start to substantively address and remedy these problems, especially with respect to drinking water sources? Okay. So that's a great one to keep in mind, Lisa, as we segue into the next discussion, which will include kind of talking through what criteria might help us prioritize ways of approaching this, in what order, what is the low-hanging fruit as we consider mitigation strategies. And this is along the lines I'm reading, you know, what's there and what can be started sooner than later. Thank you.
Ted, did you have your hand up, or was that carryover from before?
Oh yeah, I did, and then I was going to try and type it in the chat instead. But I guess something that was touched on earlier, and I think really rings true, is the number of. There's a large share of our community that gets their water from individual wells, and I know that, you know, here in the West, it's sort of a mindset of, you know, frontier spirit, and everybody kind of provides for their own, but there's a real lack of coordination. There's other than some programs that the conservation district is doing, there's not really much out there to support private well owners and coordinate them amongst their neighbors who are also private well owners. And it just seems like there would be good opportunity. You know, we solve these issues with government, you know, collectively. It seems like that's an area that maybe not a regulatory program, but some sort of public health support program.
Thanks, Ted. Duly noted. Michelle, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so to follow up off of Ted's comments about private wells, I'm super excited because my organization, Wyoming Rural Water Association, we have received some funding that allows us to interact with private well owners to provide some technical support and training for them. You know, maybe this doesn't happen in Teton County, but I know I've worked with others in the state that, hey, I have a well, it's in the middle of my corral and the well house has pesticides all in it. You know, is that a good thing? No, please don't. You know, so that's something that we would be happy to partner with Teton County and Protect Our Water Jackson Hole, if you guys would be interested in that.
Great. Good. Your organization is a little bit new to me, which doesn't mean anything. Are you new or are you not?
So Wyoming Association of Rural Water Systems, I think we've been in the state for like 37 years. And our mission is to work with public water systems. And it's supposed to be rural, so anybody less than 10,000, most of Wyoming. And we provide training and technical advice. We help operators get certified. We do on-site visits, do some technical troubleshooting, and we support the water systems in Wyoming and the wastewater systems.
Glad you're here. Guy, interested in the point source contamination from septic systems and understanding ranching impacts on water quality. Great. I know that you are joined by many. Did I miss? Yeah, thank you, Travis. Did I miss Matt's comment? Yeah. Water quality can vary with depth in the aquifer. I am concerned that test results from surface water and shallow groundwater wells should not be used or confused to portray the overall water quality at depth where most public water system wells are supplied. Okay. Thanks. And then you got Travis's attention there too, so that's I'm going to slowly, and that means slowly because I just want to make sure we don't cut anyone off. It's so helpful to have such engagement, and I know it's a challenge with these online meetings. It also seems to be a big convenience. So we're just going to keep testing how we make it comfortable and engaging for you, but we really appreciate the level of attention and feedback and ideas. It's very helpful to the project team, and it's just always interesting to hear many different perspectives, but lots of similar priorities. And I think we can all agree that's it's a comforting thing when we're lucky enough to be starting from that place. It's not always the case. Before I'm going to pivot back over to Brian and Travis, just going once or twice, and we will be saving the chat. Obviously, that's part of the reason I asked you to use it. So we'll be capturing these specific ideals and recommendations.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, I'll keep watching chat, but Travis and Brian, I'm not sure which of you was next. Are gonna
move on. So part of our challenge and what we've been tasked with to moving forward is how do we prioritize mitigation strategies, whether they're regulatory in nature or if they require, if they're structural or they require capital, construction. It's something physical. And we're looking for your input on how we could go about ranking those mitigation measures. And what you see on the screen here in front of you is just some general thoughts that we've had on potential mitigation measures. And it's probably worth just explaining how, in our minds, this process would work. Is this is essentially a ranking matrix, and we would say apply 1 to 5 points for each ranking criteria, and then sum those up, and then those with the higher scores are considered higher priority. They are, the evaluation is qualitative and quantitative. It's really challenging, and it's going to require a lot of conversation with our project team and all of you as we move ahead. But to help us look down the road, we wanted to get some input from all of you regarding what could some other criteria be when we get to the stage where we're going to start evaluating mitigation strategies in much more detail. And so some of the ones we've come up with to date include integration. Can a project be integrated into another project and gain some economies of scale and be more efficient? Another great one that Carlin brought up was immediate need. Do we need to do this right now, or can we wait down the road, or will it just even require some additional study, as far as planning and design and permitting? So that would affect that. Short-term and long-term effectiveness, would this just be a short-term solution, or is whatever this mitigation strategy is, would it be long-term? Another important one would be community acceptance. Are the community's concerns going to be addressed with a specific mitigation measure? And this is a good one to really think about next, is social benefits. So we initially noted that will it benefit society as a whole, but also be thinking about, does it address others that are not involved in these discussions that could actually be most impacted by the issue, whether probably financially. Economic benefits, are there any indirect financial benefit with a certain project or mitigation strategy? We also thought about sustainability. Is there a way to incorporate green infrastructure? This is also something that is considered when you're pursuing funding sources with the federal government. Sometimes there's a green component to those grant funds. And green green projects tend to rank higher. And then ultimately, it also is important to just look at life cycle costs. What's it going to require from a capital expense and an operating expense throughout the project's life to actually operate and construct a specific mitigation measure. Again, these are just ideas, so I'm really curious to what everyone else might think about some potential ranking criteria as we move forward. And I think we're going to save, I got one more slide and we'll kind of save some discussion after this next slide. And so the process right now, and again, we're certainly open to thoughts and ideas. Our initial concept with the project team, so the county, POW-JH, conservation district, the town, and ourselves is, this is the process we've thought of. And one is why we're here today is we need to develop the screening criteria to rank those mitigation measures. But you're also going to be seeing some documents later on before March that might throw out some suggested mitigation measures for certain water quality issues. But we need to brainstorm and think about different mitigation measures for each of these specific areas of water quality that we're looking at. And then from there, we would conduct the initial screening and then go back to the project team and further refine that initial screening and get some guidance on which mitigation measures we need to really evaluate in more detail. And then we would do a more detailed evaluation and again, present those to the project team for further refinement, and then ultimately have a final ranking of those mitigation measures. And what that'll help us do when we prepare the actual plan is we can establish a schedule for implementing mitigation measures over the long term. So I guess that's what I had for now. I guess I'm curious what everyone might think about how we would go about evaluating mitigation measures.
Maybe one way to, first of all, is there anything obvious that you think is missing?
Hey, Sarah, this is Chris. I think cost is maybe missing. And one thing that I wanted to just offer to the group is, with the passage of the water quality SPET measure this fall, we should have, funding available for local match fundings for high priority projects that are identified through this process. And so I don't think, cost should be the only criteria, but factoring that in somehow and that there are local options for funding.
What else? Anything not on the list? I'm going to ask that question from the opposite direction, which is, what struck each of you? And you can use chat or speak up. Like, that's my number one. Is there an obvious top priority or two already for you? The one or two that stick out as what would drive your decision making? Okay. Social benefits from Lisa would be a priority. Thank you. And the other thing I see, there's a lot of people who aren't on camera. And for those of you that are, at least half of you are really good poker players. So give us some feedback about right track. Does this feel comprehensive and good? Are we looking at the right things for the right reasons? This is your opportunity to shape this part, which is really important. I think there is immediate need. Say more about that, Phil. Do you mean because of the threat? I can't see you, so I can't see if you're trying to type. Coming after you when I find you on the screen, Phil. There you are. It looks to me like you're like mountain climbing or something now. So, okay, I just think we're getting behind on these huge issues. And which issues are those, Phil? I'm going to keep watching chat for his water quality overall. Okay. Makes sense. And Travis or Brian, if you have a response, or even Chris, I think I'm hearing both, and that we both have things that we can and ought to be doing as quickly as possible. And at the beginning of the presentation, Brian's remarks, you know, obviously in many places in the county, a lot of people have been doing their job because water quality overall, there's, you know, I don't want to use hyperbolic language, but I think I'll leave it to all of you to fill in the blanks. We are not yet catastrophic, but we have some really big concerns, and the time that you spend will make sure that we can sustain water quality into the future. And Michelle, there's another cue, sustainability. Grants are often available for initial projects, but then there must be the financial, technical, and managerial capacity to keep going. Yes. Well, Travis, I'm going to keep watching, but you know, I guess what I will say to you, group, and you're welcome to argue vehemently, but what I'll say based on what I'm hearing and looking at on the screen is that generally speaking, you feel like this is on the right track. All things being equal, you might prefer things to go faster.
Hey, Sarah, I think Lee is raising his hand. You might want to ask something.
Thanks, Les. I see. Les, where are you, by the way? Are you in your car? You're on mute. Hold on, Les. You're on mute. Les.
Sorry, I'm mute. There we go. I have a question for the guys from Tri-Hydro. This is a drinking water study, right, that we're part of right now. Do we have, outside of Hoback, other wells and other places in the county where we've seen degradation of the drinking water? Right now, my understanding is so far we've only messed up the surface water, Fish Creek and Flat Creek. And we have not, my understanding, had a lot of test results from other wells around the county. Where are we on that?
I guess I'll start out and maybe Carlin or David could jump in, but the Conservation District does have a test kit program that's voluntary. And there is quite a bit of data there, and there actually really, there are a few spots where maybe there are some concerns, but there aren't really any exceedances that we've seen. But again, that program is voluntary, and it's, you know, there is a small cost to it, but outside of that, we have our water, you know, we're looking at water quality data from the public water supplies. And again, it's generally the water quality is pretty good. And Brian, we missed that slide, but just some of these are really focused on Hoback, and maybe Brian, you could talk about, you know, just some of these observations from some of the public water supplies.
Yeah, so, you know, we ran over a little bit and kind of skipped over this, but, you know, this is, we pulled out the nitrite on some of the selected public systems. You know, some of them are on the West Bank, and then we have some down in the Hoback. We've got Jackson, got some of the larger public water supply users. And And so the 10 dotted line up there is the MCL. It's that maximum contaminant level of the EPA for this particular compound, nitrate, nitrite. And you see its presence, as Bob alluded to, it's getting towards a general consensus that with the nitrate related components that, anywhere from 0 to 2 milligrams per liter is probably the general background within the waters within the county. And that would be from the alluvium, or that would be from, other less tapped aquifers. But, you can see here, there's some systems that have started out with, some consistent hits that are degrading over time, and that's good. And then you can also see the graphs that tend to trend upwards in the right direction, to the right, which those are of concern. Some of them have exceeded this 10 milligrams per liter. Some of them are, intermittently approaching it. And so, there are several places within the county where we should be concerned. It would be nice to kind of throw a blanket strategy at this, right? That would be simple. But there's a lot of other variables in there with it. For instance, I concur with Bob's assessment down in the Hoback area. You've got all these small parcels for each resident. Each resident has their own well. Each resident has their own septic system. And that's, a large part of the issue down there. Unwittingly, that's just how things were built. And, there weren't any permitting restrictions or anything like that. And so, that's something that's surely to be examined here moving forward with this project, is to look at things of that nature. It's hard to, and it's also hard to say from a blanket perspective that all the quality is consistent across the county. These are identified from being in the CIDWA system. As Ted brought up earlier, there are some systems out there that, essentially are unregulated, and they're essentially, some sort of community system. What's going on with them? I think there's a few that we don't know about, right? And then there's, the voluntary program that Carlin and his folks have put together, that at a very low cost, individual residents can take advantage of. And maybe that's something else to more consciously push, right? To get a better sense across the county of, any concerns. Carlin, you've got your hand raised.
Thanks. Yeah, so Carlin Gerard, Teton Conservation District. Just wanted to note, really directing to Les's question regarding nitrate in particular. There are other examples of places. Hoback is where we exceed the drinking water standard. So we certainly see elevated nitrate concentrations at other areas in southern Teton County, definitely around the South Park Service Center, around Camp Creek, Horse Creek, and into Hoback. There's other examples of areas with elevated nitrate in around Kelly, some in Alta, and then other, more smaller locations as well. But I think it is important to also note that, PFAS is another contaminant that we are now definitely documenting in drinking water wells that I think I would include on that list. We have examples of gas station failures, some somewhat recent, last decade or so, that have resulted in remediation requirements and and drinking water issues. So, you know, and even the town of Jackson, on Carnes Meadow, has some benzene currently being found in it. Again, not exceeding drinking water standards. Then beyond that, there's naturally occurring issues that people definitely deal with, some of which are health concerns as well. So I just thought I'd try to round out that picture.
And I just want to make sure y'all saw Michelle's comment. Many of the systems with downward trends have installed treatment to remove nitrates, a fairly expensive process for the smaller systems. And thank you, Carly. I don't see any other hands up, Travis, so I think we can continue forward.
Hey, Sarah, on Michelle's note, and maybe it's obvious to everyone, but by treating the drinking water facilities, you know, you're removing that nitrate from the drinking water, but the background contamination, we don't really know if it's continuing an upward trend or, you know, it's continuing to pollute the groundwater at higher concentrations. Without data, we don't know the answer to that.
From Matt, recommend review an inventory of the oldest private septic systems. Teton County is likely lacking records on this to assess septic tank condition and leach field height above seasonal groundwater, etc. Provide public information program to help owners understand the need to be responsible and make needed improvements, funding assistance, especially for limited incomes. Anyone from the county want to talk about the existing efforts here?
Sarah, this is Amy. You mean existing efforts related to septic system management?
Yes. Matt, I know you guys have taken either, you know, mapping and funding. I know this has been a topic of discussion. Anything you want to share?
Yeah, well, and maybe not everyone on this call knows that the Conservation District did a really great project a few years ago to map and inventory all the septic systems. Or not all, I should never use the word all, but most of the septic systems in the county and what the type was. And we have that information, and I feel like that's a really good tool we have at our hand. It continues to get more aged as we go along, and we're adding additional systems that into the inventory of them. I'd say though, you're right that it's not the new systems necessarily that are of issue. It's the older ones, most likely, that are causing problems. That said, I think we had some conversation on mute here. You know, the issues too now are, how do we, in areas where we already have an issue that's known, and then we get an application for a septic system now on an unbuilt lot. Talking about how we manage additional development potential or additional density in areas that already have known problems. And, you know, it becomes a real issue where you're reducing the amount of development potential in an area or someone's individual lot.
Thanks, Amy.
And I guess maybe I could add to Matt's comment. You know, we've had some discussions about, is it feasible to come up with some sort of assistance program to help people replace or upgrade septic systems? You know, that's one thing for the wastewater focus group to think about. And then we also did update that wastewater facility map as of, I want to say, August.
Oh, right, Travis. Thanks for.
Yeah, and you'll be seeing that, you know, here shortly. So there's almost 2,600 small wastewater facilities in the county.
And we actually have reasonably good records that do go back quite a ways. Into the 70s at least.
And there's also some good information from the conservation districts inspection and maintenance program that they managed from 2017 to 2019. That gives us a general, I think there are nearly 300 systems that participated in that. So we have a pretty good sample size and could make some realistic estimates of how many systems need maintenance.
I know that we are moving in on the top of the hour. Do all of you have a clear picture about next steps and the next couple of meetings? Now would be the time to weigh in if you have a strong opinion, virtual versus in person. Based on attendance, I would say virtual. It's certainly up to the attendance. Can you give me a nod or a thumbs up if that is true for you? Or type into chat if you prefer in person. I see a couple of thumbs up. Okay. Virtual is easier. Okay. Helpful. Okay. Bye, Lisa. I think that was a wave. Maybe that was either thumbs up or wave, but if you're leaving, thanks for being here. Oh, I never do it right either. I'm just glad they don't have any of the, yeah, right. They're all politically correct and that keeps us out of trouble. All right, so that is settled. It looks to me like, and Sean, either's fine. Okay, thanks for being agreeable, but it looks just based on the people today, that's great. We will continue to work at engagement because it is hard and it's afternoon meeting and we're all tired and sick of screens. But you've provided valuable feedback and I hope you'll continue to do that for the project team and the policymakers. Brian or Travis or Chris, do you need anything more from this group for today? Okay.
No, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it and don't hesitate to reach out if you have thoughts or ideas.
Yeah.
Just adding on that, the public engagement webpage that we have set up for this project, please reach out to us. We all receive those messages. If you send a message through that platform, that's a good way to make sure we have record of your comments and your thoughts. We will take those throughout the process. So I hope we get some more discussion than we got today. Kind of feel like everybody got their tongues today a little bit. But if this prompts some ideas that you want to follow up with any of us individually, please do.
Great. All right, well, here's the awkward end of every single Zoom meeting, even though we've had like 10,000 of them. It's like, goodbye, everybody. I'm going to stay on in case somebody needs something, but otherwise, you are free to go about your day with our appreciation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep, thank you. Adios.
Thanks, Guy. Got it. Bye, Agnes. Thanks, Phil. I think we're good, Miss Ashley.
Sounds good. Well, I guess unless anyone has comments, I'll end the meeting in a couple moments here.
Okay. And we'll just capture the chat. There were some good recommendations or, good things to capture for next steps on the criteria and a couple other places. So